Hello, everyone. So for we're doing another video for Dryad's Crown Day, celebrating the release of book 6 of the Dryad's Crown. We have with us a very special person in my life, the editor of the Dryad's Crown, Holly Lynn Walrath. Holly, thank you for making time to chat with me about all things literary.
Yes, of course.
So the role between editor and writer, I think, is really a fascinating one. And it's a historic role, but I do feel like it's evolved and changed over time. Um, you came to the Dryad's Crown, I think, with book 3.
Mhm.
And it's an interesting role because it feels like oftentimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you usually get a book at the end of the process where it's like, here, fix this, make it better. Whereas with us, you're kind of both in the middle of it, where I'm still working on it. And so you're kind of able to get a little bit in front of it in some ways before I even get to the parts that I'm going to later regret writing. So is that, I mean, I don't know what the question is there. I'm just curious if that's a different process than what you're used to, or kind of what's your approach to editing when you're dealing with stuff. That's
Yeah,
a
I
really
mean,
bad question, but I'll trust you to make something good out of it.
it's okay. No, I mean, it's interesting because I've done other series of books before, and usually I do the whole series. But like, your writing is already sort of in a good place to like have me look at it, and it didn't really feel weird coming in midway. Normally I tell people that I like to have a complete done thing. Like
Yeah.
you said, like give it to me and I will fix it. And so it's hard to work at an earlier process in the writing because you need to feel done with it and that you can't look at it
Yeah.
anymore or you're like tired of it. And so then you get that gap where I can like kind of work with it. And so I don't often work on things in progress. But this is sort of different because it is a series, and
Mm.
so it just has different kind of rules.
Yeah, I guess it made me realize that having an editor before you're done actually has its benefits, because there have been a few times where I'll email you and be like, help, I don't know where this is going, or I've
Yeah.
got this problem and I don't quite know how to fix it. And I know you're going to have to deal with it eventually. So it's helpful for me to get that feedback from you and go, okay, I need to push ahead. And it's also going to be interesting because you got a outline for
Mhm.
the whole series, but I'm sure getting the books, you're like, oh, this is what he meant,
Yeah.
which sometimes I
Yeah.
don't even know what I mean while I'm working on it. I'm like, I don't know, I'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I like to have an outline for a series because it helps me sort of think through like where are we going. In that there's a lot of little things that you do this a lot where you like sprinkle things throughout the series that will later, kind of all come together. And so it's helpful to have that to refer back to. And even like sometimes I'll be editing a series and I'll get the outline and then I'll edit one book and then I'll be like, do you have a revised outline? Because the person
Things
has sort of like
changed.
changed. Yeah. Like, and it's just really useful to like refer back to that, even if it's not like, hard and fast, the thing that it's going to end up being. It's just nice to be like, what are we going towards here? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's weird because I'm almost done with book 7 now. And book 7 was the one that I think I had the least written on in my outline,
Mm-hmm.
but it was the one that went the fastest. It was the easiest one for me to write. I think I wrote it probably in a third of the time. And I don't think it was because I didn't outline it. I think it was because since I'm getting to the end of the story,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like there's already a momentum where I'm like, okay, these are the beats that I need to hit. And I just sort of know that I need to get there. And so it is like one of those things where, yeah, like once you get towards the end of something, I'm like, okay, now this is getting to the point where if I don't wrap this up, the book is going to be twice as long.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice to like, it must be nice to do it that way because your series is like smaller little stories, you can sort of like get the vibe of each one as you're going, and they all sort of like feed into each other. And so it must be nice to kind of like, as you're going, you're like, oh, I'm gonna get this done. And yeah.
Well, and even admittedly, it's very stop start, which
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to keep doing that. I think I probably will write longer works going forward.
Yeah.
But, and we've talked about this, that it's been tremendously helpful for me in growing as a writer,
Yeah.
because
Not that
I'm
you
writing
weren't
a
good to
little,
begin with.
but I mean,
But
but I'm not getting ahead of myself too much.
yeah.
And I'm getting that feedback. And I don't know if you've heard me say this before, but my theory about editors has always been that a good editor will make your book better, but a great editor will make you better.
Yeah,
And
oh, that's the plan. Like, I like when that happens.
yeah.
I think it's very dependent on like the relationship. If you
Mhm.
have a good relationship with an editor and you work with them over and over, even like in traditional publishing,
Yeah.
not just like self-publishing, they start to get a feel for like your writing and what you have the capacity to do as a writer.
Mhm.
And so like, a lot of it's hard because sometimes I'll get like a one-off client and I'm like, I don't know if you, especially if it's like a very new writer, are going to be able to manage the scope of this edit suggestion. So I might like dial that back a little bit. And I don't feel like I have to do that very much with you because I know that you're like growing, and each book, the minor things have kind of fallen away
Mhm.
and you're not doing those, and so I'm able to like focus more on the bigger picture.
Well, and I think that's, when we're talking about editing, the services that I was really looking for was more of that developmental editing.
Right.
And I personally, when I'm editing my own stuff, I line edit by default. Like
Yeah.
I'm always thinking sentence by sentence. It's very hard for me to look at the whole thing. And that was actually one of the most reassuring things when we were working on book 3, is you were suggesting whole sections being moved. And I was like, oh, that's stuff that I just would not do.
Like, I can do that.
Yeah. And it's not that I'm being stubborn. It's just that like, I'm like, oh yeah, this whole section makes more sense over here,
Yeah.
but I'm not thinking about it because I tend to hop like, I finished a sentence. Now I'm going to look at this set. Like it's one of the reasons why I think that some writers make good editors, but I don't think all writers,
Yeah.
because for me, I get too hung up on the individual sentence, and I've tried to let go of that, but it's hard for me. And that's why it's so helpful to have someone who can look at it big picture and go, okay, I was reading this, and the big issues I had in the story was, this part didn't make sense. And I feel like this part moves slowly. And those are things that I can fix, but I can't fix it by myself.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this is what the majority of writers mostly need help with, is the bigger picture developmental edit, where you're looking at like, are these characters making sense? Are they having a character arc? Is the plot having, a satisfying arc? Is the setting, making sense? Is the world building making sense? All of those kind of like bigger things. Like, even like I'm also a writer, and those are also things that I struggle with. So like, I'm probably similar to you in that I edit as I write, and the line level stuff is not as hard for me, but I have a critique group still, and I need
Mhm.
someone to be like, well, this thing, and it's oftentimes like things I didn't see at
Yeah.
all, or didn't think of. And it's funny because like I always check with my clients before I start on a project like, what is the thing that you are worried about for this,
Mhm.
book or whatever that I'm editing. And very often the thing that the writer is worried about is not the problem. Like, that's not, like, it's fine. Like, I'm like, that thing
Yeah.
is fine. Like,
Yeah.
this is the thing you need to worry about. And so it's funny because, like, I just think we have a different perspective as writers of what we're doing and what kind of like where our weaknesses are, and you just need an outside voice, even myself as an editor.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and this could be a whole other topic all to itself, is I sometimes get a little depressed when I'm on Twitter,
Yeah.
and not for the reasons that we normally get depressed about Twitter, but I also get depressed because, like, I follow a lot of agents and I follow a lot of editors and I follow a lot of literary people, and I don't want to like cast any stones, but at times I'll be reading their posts and I'm like, do you all even like writers? Like,
Oh
well, I mean, just like you can tell that like it's been a long day for them.
no. Oh.
And what I think happens is I think sometimes it's like we love the book
Uh-huh.
and we like really good writers, but we forget sometimes that in order to become a good writer, sometimes you start off as a bad writer in need of an editor.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I really liked about working with you is I don't think you ignore the emotional component of the person trying to tell the story. Like, that there is like a human being who gets frustrated and who needs a little bit of, not that you were having to pat me on the back a bunch because my ego is fine, but you realize that like that these people are people and they're not just problems to be fixed sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times the editor is supposed to be sort of a cheerleader, but
Mhm.
like not, in the sense that we're just being like, hurrah,
Yeah.
but in the sense that we're rooting for you.
Mhm.
And it's so funny because like every writer is different. Like I remember one time a guy queried me, and I, kind of told him that I was like, well, he's like, I want you to like eviscerate my writing. Like, and I'm like, I don't do that. I mean, I think
I
you
don't
need a
want
different
that.
editor. Like and I was like, yeah, no, I mean, my job is to like champion your writing and make it better and help you, get better and feel better about yourself. And he was like, I don't want that. I'm like, okay, go somewhere else. Yeah, like some people are not into that, but just writing is just so hard.
Mhm.
And there is so much emotional baggage with it. And everything that you write, it reflects your personality and who you are and the kind of past that you bring to the page. Even if you're writing, an adventure at sea,
Yeah.
there's still all that stuff that you bring to the page as the person, and that's what makes your writing special, is that you are different than everyone else and you have these different experiences and perspectives. And um if an editor makes you feel bad, they're probably not the right editor for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is one of those, like, I get it. Like, it's good content to be like, here are the top 10 things that annoy me about writers.
Oh no.
But you're, as a writer, you're reading that going, oh gosh, I do all of those.
Oh no. I
It's
do not endorse that.
but
Oh
but but I
yeah.
but I think, and part of it is because you are a writer, like, and you deal
Mhm.
with the frustrations too, and so yeah, that there is a tremendous emotional component to it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not doing this so that someone can eviscerate me. Like, I genuinely want people to read it and be like, enjoy the experience because I'm enjoying it while I'm writing it. And yeah, I don't know. But, well, and I did want to talk about this when I was first, the way that I found you was, I talked to our mutual friend, Bonnie Stufflebeam, and I was
Yeah.
like, Bonnie, I need an editor. Who do you know? Who would you recommend? And she gave me your name, and she was like, I love Holly. Holly's the best. She's like the
Yeah.
coolest human ever, and you should definitely reach out to her. And so I did. But the one thing when I was kind of like doing the cyber stalking was just noticing how important poetry is to you and just how much you identify as a poet. And I was like, that's the kind of person I want to work with, because when I'm writing, and I don't know if it comes out, but I'm very concerned about how everything sounds.
Mhm.
I want it to sound right. I want it to have the right rhythm. I want it to end on the right consonants, and and not feel, because when I want someone to read it, I want it to read well. And so working with a poet, I was like, they're going to see the words on the page a little bit differently because of what your relationship is to words. Do you find that working as a poet helps you as an editor?
Oh man, yes, I think, it's funny because like I don't do a lot of like copy editing or proofreading. I do them, like
Mhm.
that's something I offer. Um, and like when I do get to copy edit, I'm like, I will do this,
Yeah.
like it's exciting to get to like, because I basically go in and like not rewrite, but like make suggestions on a line level for a
Mhm.
copy edit. And I think that a lot of times the poet stuff comes out more in that. But I think there's a lot of things about poetry that transfer really well to fiction. And it is that like sound of like things that just like sound nice, or descriptions that sound nice, and having that ear for poetry, I think is like really, really useful. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and even I've got your hold on just a second. Well, let's see. Oh, there we go. Got the
Oh
books
man,
right there.
yeah.
We got to break these out just real quick.
Awesome.
Do the promotional work here.
Yes.
But one thing I was also thinking about with poetry is I would like to get a lot better at like realizing that when you're writing, you don't have to say everything, that
Yeah.
you can, that what you choose to not say can still be like the reader will still pick up on certain things. And I think that as a poet, I think you do it really well, where there will be like a stanza and there are things not being said,
Hmm.
but the poem is still much fuller than the total sum of the words. And that's something that I think editors like can really, like a good editor can really see, is like, okay, you're not saying this, and that's actually a good thing.
Well, yeah, and like you might look at it as like, what am I cutting out?
Mhm.
That's fluff, kind of. But it's so interesting that you bring that up because I was thinking about this today in terms of art. So like I do a lot of drawing and like art stuff as like a fun relaxation hobby. And I was thinking about how when I was younger, I wish someone had told me as an artist, you don't have to connect all the dots. Like when you're drawing something, you can leave a gap in the line, or let's say you're drawing a cat, you don't have to draw the whole line
Yeah.
of the cat. You can have like blank little pieces that the eye fills in those pieces, and they're almost more interesting in that way. And I think writing is the same way, and that you can have these gaps that the reader fills in, and it's like could be something super simple like the characters went from point A to point B and we don't need to know about that journey, because it wasn't relevant to the plot. That you just don't have to tell that.
Yeah.
So it just, yeah, it's such an interesting concept, and I've been thinking about it a lot more.
Yeah, well, and similarly, because I have a scene in book 7, without spoiling anything. I've got a scene in book 7 where a character has to come back and tell some people some important information. I was like, well, I could write that scene, and then everyone's like crying and sad. I was like, but I don't have to. Instead,
Yeah.
I jump past that scene and I get to the scene where one of the characters is packing and trying to get the hell out of town. And in her packing, you're like, oh, this is her reaction to the thing that she found out. And it's like we
Right.
don't even have to jump into the whole like other scene. Like we can just skip past it. And that's something as a writer, I think there's some writers who do it really well. And it's definitely something that I've been looking at. It's like, how do you communicate these things without having to go for the obvious scene?
Yeah, and it's like you have a person on the other side reading the book.
Mhm.
And so I think you have to think about your ideal reader and what they want to see. And if you're not showing them the scene they want to see, they're going to be like, but I wanted to see that.
Yeah.
Like, I can't. Yeah, like that happens a lot with my clients is I'll be like, this big important scene, you didn't show it. And why? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think I've done this to you before where I'm like, please show me
Book 3. Yeah, I
yeah.
remember, because there's a scene where a major character literally gets decapitated, and I cut the camera off and moved away from it. And you're
I was
like,
like, hello. I need decapitation scene, please.
yeah,
Yeah, but like a lot of times it's the other way. Like
yeah,
that is less common
yeah,
than me being like, this is not doing anything. Let's get rid of it, you know?
yeah, yeah. And even like I'm trying to figure out, yeah, in book 7, like there's some really, I'm going to speak euphemistically here. There's a very sensitive scene in the book. And it takes up about 1,000 words. It's not a small scene in the book, at least for it being a short book. And it's like me trying to figure out how to write it without being explicit, but still telling it in a way that people read and go, oh, wow, that was like, sometimes people think something's explicit, even though nothing on the page said
Right.
that. It's kind of like the horror movie Halloween, there's no blood in it,
Right.
but no one remembers that.
There is a pumpkin in every scene.
Yes.
But other than that,
Yeah, it's a bloodless horror movie, and it's like,
yeah.
oh, that's fascinating. But yeah, when you're watching it, you're not even thinking about that.
Yeah.
And I love that about like really well written books. Sometimes you get those scenes and you're like, wow, we never even thought about this, and I didn't even miss it,
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it's a fun thing as writers, but I think something about working with a poet, you're like, okay, this is a person who is wrestling at a very granular level with words, which is a
Yeah.
good thing. And sometimes you will do line editing, like
I do.
occasionally you'll jump in, and it's always like when I'm going through, I'm always like, accept. Like I'm like, yep, I'm good.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, I don't normally do that in a developmental edit, but if I see something that's like, oh, that just needs fixing, I'll
Yeah.
go in and fix it. I mean, very often it's just for illustration purposes.
Yeah.
So like I was just editing a book for a client and I was like, I am making this change so that you can see like something you could put there, maybe I put a sentence and I say in the comment or something like this, and you have, just rewrite it your own way. So it's not like I'm putting in a thing in order to like rewrite your words. It's so that you can kind of like see where you could go with it.
Yeah. Well, and I will fully acknowledge that I've had privileges that other writers haven't had, which is I do have a proofreader.
Yes.
So that's always like a
useful.
good thing to say, like, okay, if Holly doesn't catch it and if I don't catch it, Kara will catch it.
Yeah.
And if
I
Kara
mean,
doesn't catch it, it's fine.
you need multiple eyes. Like,
Yeah.
this is in traditional publishing, it goes the same way. You have a developmental editor. A lot of times an agent will do an edit, then the
Mhm.
developmental editor will do the edit, and then they'll have like a copy editor, and then sometimes a proofreader,
Yeah.
so it goes through those levels. And like, I think it's very important to have multiple eyes, even let's say you do hire a proofreader, if the content is like really heavy with errors, or you're not the kind of poetic type of person, which is fine, you might benefit from having, multiple rounds and try to get a different person to do those. So like I very often try very hard to get my clients to, if they want me to do one aspect and they want a second round that's a different type of editing, I will be like, let me hook you up with someone or find someone that can do that, because it's once you've looked at a thing like you as a writer so many times, even as an editor, you can miss stuff,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I think it's the interesting part about indie writing is I'm hopeful, and I think in the future, like indie editing, like even now you hear people talking about, like, as an indie editor, that they're really, they're getting an editor, they're getting a proofreader, they're getting a professional cover designer, and they'll talk about like the cost that's going into that, and it is significant.
Yeah.
But the benefit of it is, if the book does well, you're actually getting a pretty big chunk of that returned back to you. So
Yeah.
there,
I mean, like, it's like, it depends on the writer. Like some
yeah.
people can get away with like not having a copy editor because they are good at that and they
Mhm.
enjoy doing that themselves. And, it just depends on the writer. Like I've had writers who are very good at the larger picture and don't really want a lot of like plot edits, and then I'll just do a copy edit, or vice versa. And I think it's really interesting to see, I think when indie books and self-publishing first got started, there was definitely a negative stigma about the books like not being edited or having a lot of errors or whatever, and now it seems like people are realizing, oh, like, I need an editor to make this, because that's what it would happen if it was a traditionally published book. And there are a lot of editors who are just doing that, like that's their whole role. And like I tell people, the majority of my clients are, self-published authors, but a lot of them are very successful and like do really well, and they get a return on that investment.
Yeah.
So, and you can find editors that don't charge, excessive rates. Like, there are editors who are just starting out and are really eager to like get, some experience and work with you. And there, are editors who do like discounts at certain times of the year,
Yeah.
so like sometimes at the end of the year, I'll be like, I'm doing my end of the year, gift discount, and I'll do like a discounted, critique package. And so those are things that you can kind of explore. And there are different levels of editors, and like you don't always need the super expensive editor.
Mhm.
So
Well,
all respect to them.
and I think it's good to remind yourself as a writer that, like, uh, writing workshops are expensive. MFA programs are expensive.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things, if you want to like hone your craft, that are all good things, but it's all expensive. But honestly, a good editor, as I kind of mentioned earlier, like that's a good learning process too.
Yeah.
Like I've been part of critique groups, and I will say that I get very picky about the critique groups.
Yeah.
And it's not because like I'm just fighting with them all the time, but at the same time, I don't want to like be rude and be like, I hear you, but I'm not taking your advice. Like,
Right. You're thinking that in your head, but
yeah, I'm like, good job,
um
but no, I'm not doing that.
yeah, like I did a lot of like workshopping and stuff when I was like first starting out as a writer, and I definitely encountered the thing where like I just was writing the weird thing in the class. Like
Yeah.
everyone else is writing like a realistic, memoir or like fiction that's, very quote unquote realist literary, and I'm just over here like, and then there were witches. And I was like, oh, like I need to find a group that does kind of similar things, and that really helped. But I agree, like once you get to a certain point in your writing, it's just not as helpful. You would rather have that like professional opinion. So
Yeah. And I think that that's also one of those tricky things where it's not bragging, but you do go, okay, I've been writing for 20 years in a sort of
yeah.
serious capacity. I don't need to hang out with the 19-year-olds at the coffee shop who are just beginning to figure out certain things. Like,
Well, and here's the thing is like when you've been doing it for a while, you have people recognize your work and they
mhm,
know that they like what you do, and they don't, it's like I've now gotten to the point where like if I submit a story and I know the editor, let's say for the anthology or the magazine, I have a much better confidence level that it'll get accepted. And I don't worry about them editing my thing.
Yeah.
So, because I know them and I've worked with them before, and like, so you build those relationships and you start to realize that like, yeah, what you're writing is on the basic level probably good. It's more about getting that edge above everyone else.
And one of the things that I was really looking for when I got an editor was, since I was working in fantasy, is really working with a person who is familiar with the industry.
Yeah.
Because occasionally you don't always know, like we don't really do that anymore, or we don't like, there's certain things
Yeah.
that maybe in your head you're like, this is so novel, and it's like, no, we've seen this.
Yeah. Like, that's a little pat.
And or even this is one of the more embarrassing stories that I have. When I was first creating the world, was I basically created something that I was like, oh, this sounds so great. And I showed it to my friend. He's like, oh yeah, that's from Discworld.
You're
I
like,
was like,
oh,
what? Terry Pratchett? He's like, oh yeah. It's like, and like without even realizing it, I had taken
yeah.
that, internalized it, and then thought it was my idea. And I was like, oh God, that would have been a nightmare if I had published that. And everyone's like,
Right.
why is he writing Discworld, but not funny? Like,
no.
oh, that wouldn't be good. So I rewrote it and reworked it, and made the world round. And yeah, it was like, but it was one of those things where like I think when you're working in a genre, it is good to have people who kind of, they know the community well enough to be like, yeah, you may not want to do that.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because like sometimes I'll work with like a writer who's doing something traditional,
Yeah.
and I like with traditional publishing, and I have to like take a step back and think about, well, like what does traditional publishing want out of this? Like not like in a negative way, but just that like in self-publishing there's a different set of rules. Like you're trying to get the reader to be invested in your product and be invested in the book series, and you're really really catering to the reader first and foremost. There's no one else involved. You're not trying to like fight other writers that are getting the marketing budget at the big five. You're not trying to fight, like you're not trying to like please reviewers, for example, who have a different set of expectations than readers. And so you're very much like doing what the reader wants. You're like, readers like this to be fast paced, they're going to like want to pick up the next book, blah blah blah. And in a traditional publishing, that it's just a whole different set of expectations. And it's funny because like sometimes I'll overhear like a traditional publishing editor say something and I'm like, oh wait a second.
It really is different. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's there's a lot of overlap in what they think readers are looking for or whatever, but you don't have as much middleman, and so you're able to just write what you want and what readers want.
Yeah.
And I think you had tweeted about this because there was something going around on Twitter about people were like surprised that traditional published writers often write to what their agent or editor like tells them to write.
Yeah.
And I was like, are we surprised? This is, yeah, I mean, because like I have a friend, she's a traditional published writer, and she's done like Star Trek books and stuff, and they will give her an outline.
Yeah.
And be like, you are going to write, this is what's going to happen in this chapter, this is what's going to happen in that chapter. And people are like floored by that, I guess, on Twitter. I was like, yeah, that's what it's like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, yeah, part of that idea was, I think one of the benefits of being an indie writer is the freedom to be like, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to just do what I want. But I do think that, yeah, we are writing in genre, we are writing to the reader. And it's like, the reader's going to pick up your book. I mean, in part because they're like, ooh, I like epic fantasy that features, a female protagonist who has a found family. Like, those are the tropes that I enjoy. And then they read yours and they may want variations on that, but they also don't want you to kick dirt on the thing that they like.
No.
They don't
Yeah.
want to be like, and now I'm going to show you why it's all dumb, you know,
Yeah.
which I think happened in comics where it was like there was this dark period in comics where they were like, you like superheroes? Now I'm going to tell you why superheroes are terrible. And there was like a whole sort of dark movement
Yeah.
in comics. And I feel like it doesn't fly always in fantasy to be like, I know you love the chosen one trope, but I'm now going to, but sometimes the subversion of that trope, if people are tired of it, can also be really good. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think I don't know. It's so hard to like think about trends and
Yeah.
like just don't. That's why, don't worry about that. Just write the thing that you like, because I do think you have to like have an expectation. Like if the reader has an expectation about what the book is going to be about, then you have to sort of fulfill that in some way. And either by giving them what they want, so like if it's romance and the characters like kiss at the end, or subverting that in some way, and there kind of has to be a reason to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I may be spoiling too much, but one of my favorite things to do as an author is you think I'm going to subvert it, but I don't. Like,
Yeah. Like,
it's
fine.
it's
You
like,
think this is going to end badly and
nope,
it
nope, it's good.
doesn't. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and that's been the thing, like you and my wife have both been reading, ahead of everyone else. And so, my wife gets really invested in the love story between Silbury and Maricel.
Yeah.
And she's like, are they? And I'm like, we're not
Won't
done yet.
Won't they?
The book's not over yet. Like, be patient. But she'll get really like
Yeah.
upset at me and be like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, give it time. It's coming. It's let's wait till we get to book 9 and all that. But
Yeah.
but I do think, or I also like and I think you're no longer fooled by it. It's a bad habit of mine. I'm going to think that, I'm going to make you think that I killed the character.
Yeah.
And then like 30 pages later, you're like, oh, nope, they're alive.
Yeah.
I do that maybe a little too much. I've
Good
tried
all
to
the
like,
time. And
yeah,
it's never not good, I think.
it's the old.
What it's like, that is the classic fantasy subversion.
Yeah.
Like I remember being in middle school and reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time.
Yeah.
My mom had read me The Hobbit like as like a bedtime story, and I was like 12 and I read The Lord of the Rings and got to the point where we think Gandalf is dead, and I was like, like I'm so mad at this book. Why did you make me read this? I was like so mad at my mother. I literally put down the book and would not read the next book. And then finally my mom was like, you should probably finish that series.
Keep reading.
Keep going. I was so invested in it. I didn't have a lot of other like I grew up in like small town Texas. I didn't have a lot of other like fantasy reference points,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and that's like the OG of like faked out deaths, because people forget, because we all know Gandalf the Grey, Gandalf the White and all that, but like people forget that like when he first wrote that, I mean, he killed off like one of the main characters.
Yeah.
Like, they needed that dude. And
people were failing without him. So yeah.
And so like when George R.R. Martin kills off Ned Stark in the first book, people are like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, this is a thing that happens, except in George R.R. Martin's world, they never come back. But
yeah, he just kills people willy-nilly. I'm gonna kill
them all out. But yeah, it's Shakespearean. Well, I know you've had a busy week. You just got back from Worldcon. I'm a little jealous. I wanted to go.
It was good. It was good. I'm tired. Like I was in the dealer room a lot, and I had, it was a little bit hectic. Yeah. But yeah, it was really cool, and like I met a lot of lovely people, and I highly recommend it if you can get to one of the ones coming up. They're gonna be good.
Yeah, this one was in Chicago. What's next year's? Where's that?
I think the next year's is in China.
I'll pass on that one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people may not be going to that one. Although I think it would be cool to visit China, but
yeah.
And then I think, where's the one after that? The one after that, I can't remember. I think it was going to be in the US and it was like uncontested, but I can't remember where it was.
Okay. Houston. That's where we need it next.
That would be cool. I would like that. And then I'm going to World Fantasy Con in November, which
Nice.
is in New Orleans.
Yeah.
I'm very excited.
I'm going to be going to the World Fantasy next year that will be in Kansas City.
Nice.
So because
Cool.
the paperback and the audiobook will be out at that point. So then I will be able to get my own booth.
Yes.
And I'll get to sit behind it and do what you do, where I'm just like waiting for people.
I highly recommend having friends to help to sit with you. And then, you apply to be on programming because
Yeah.
that really filters people to your table. Like, so we had a ton of authors at Interstellar Flight Press that were on panels and stuff, and I was on panels, and people come down and talk to you at the table after your panel. And so, it's yeah, do the programming.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. And I'm going to bring my oldest daughter with me to also
Nice.
hold down the booth while I am
Yes.
wandering around.
Would you like a book by my dad? I love it.
I'm going to make t-shirts and everything, just to be like, all right, we're going to wear
awesome.
matching shirts. And she's like, oh gosh, Dad, please don't. Oh. Well, Holly, thank you so much for editing my books.
You're welcome. Thank you for reaching out to me, because these are so much fun, and I've really loved editing them, and I don't get to edit fun things a lot. So like a lot of my stuff, I'm like, oh, this is, I just love anything genre related, and so it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, more books will be coming, so yay.
Yay.
And then I will have your contact if people want to know more about you, hlwalrath.com.
Yep.
So I'll have the link
That's true.
below. So anyone who's interested in your poetry, your writing, editing, I think in particular,
Yeah.
since that's kind of the theme of our conversation. And then also social links, and also mention Interstellar Flight magazine, which is great. I think I have issues back here as well with those. So.
Nice. Yes, awesome. Yeah, and I do take new clients, but it's on like a 3-month basis. So if you want to get on the calendar, let me know. It'll be like 3 months from now, but that's okay.
This stuff takes a while.
It takes time. I'm booked usually for like 3 months at least. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Holly, for
Thank you.
spending some time, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds
All right.
good.
Bye.
Bye.